Hi, I'm Captain Adam Orton with the Canadian Army Podcast. There are a surprising number of grenades without pins, improvised explosives, old bombs, and all sorts of other explosive hazards out in the world. That's where Explosive Ordnance Disposal, aka EOD operators, come in. They try to neutralize some of the most dangerous and unpredictable items on and off of the battlefield. MWO Marty Gratrix is an EOD operator from the Canadian Armed Forces Joint Counter-Explosive Threat Team, or JCET, and he's one of the people who's out there trying to put the proverbial pins back in the grenades. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Appreciate being here.
So, obviously being an EOD operator is a pretty dangerous job. Why do people choose to put themselves in harm's way for this career?
Why people decide to get into this trade, it's voluntary, so no one can be forced into this. So
That's
you have
good.
to, but I suppose it's people looking to make the world a bit of a safer place, with what's going on in the world and historical conflict zones. And even with the domestic threat, there's always going to be a need for this particular specialty skill set at home and abroad. So people might just have a sense of wanting to assist with reducing that threat.
I think people often underestimate the domestic threat because we haven't had a lot of warfare in Canada recently, but these things tend to pop up unexpectedly. And, it's not necessarily that bad people are doing bad things. It's just sometimes the grenade shows up out of nowhere.
Well, you see a lot of that old ordnance that came back with our service members in World War II, even World War I. They find stuff that soldiers had brought back, war trophies that are, families finding some of this stuff in their basements. So, there's a lot of that
That's
for
right.
sure. So, it pops up, and that's where EOD domestically really plays a huge part. And of course, with the improvised explosive device threats across the globe, even in a domestic context, it exists. So we have to be prepared.
Maybe tell us a little bit about how this specialty came to be. At some point, I guess, we started having a lot of explosives on the battlefield, and it seemed necessary to do something about it.
Well, if you go back to, even World War I, the use of artillery shells buried with the fuses facing up, the tanks could drive over them and initiate that was kind of the beginning of the evolution of mine warfare. How do you get the target to the explosive? They have to put pressure on it. And that evolved to hey, maybe we could command detonate this somehow. Maybe we can, fire it from artillery. So there's a history of evolution to the explosive threat.
Yes.
When it comes to the IED side, to the improvised explosive device, it really was, we don't have access to military ordnance. How do we build something ourselves? We don't have access to the fusing systems that we need to initiate these different explosive threats. How do we improvise that? Mm-hmm. So as you branch off into the conventional munitions that we're dealing with on the battlefield, and here and domestically, most of it was our own stuff from legacy ranges and legacy training. But then over to expeditionary operations or overseas operations where nefarious actors are building this stuff in order to fight.
Big boom is always a pretty useful tool if you're fighting an enemy.
It is, and with the IED portion to this whole thing, it's cheap and easily accessible, easy to create, and you can target multi-million-dollar machinery along with personnel for low cost and at low risk to yourself. So that's where terrorist organizations and in some cases state-funded actors are implementing this stuff on the battlefield, and that's why.
Yeah, and it gets left behind too. So what happens is even we encountered an unusual situation in Afghanistan where we hit an IED that was in the middle of nowhere. There was no reasonable expectation that you would hit something there. And probably because at some point that was a route or something from years ago, and it just happened to be sitting there waiting for forever. And then there it goes. And so that stuff is littered across the battlefield.
Oh, yeah. And it migrates too with the weather. Water can wash this stuff downstream. If you're familiar with the Arghandab riverbed in Kandahar, that route washed a lot of the explosive threats and migrated them across that platform. So it can move and it can be there for decades. It really never goes away. It's a big problem.
So we've got IEDs, let's say, considered unconventional, and then we have conventional munitions. Can you explain the difference for people, please?
When we compare what's considered conventional to unconventional, conventional very much being manufactured ordnance and or booby traps and or battlefield munitions that come off an assembly line that are mass-produced with safe explosives inside, meaning a grenade would be conventional. But when I talk about unconventional is anything outside of that. IEDs, improvised explosive devices, those would be considered unconventional.
Let's maybe start a little bit from an operational standpoint. What does an EOD operator do on the battlefield? What does that look like when you're on the ground?
EOD operators are just highly trained specialists in the explosive threat reduction space. Really, it's a mobility. It's a freedom of movement piece to the whole thing. IEDs are point obstacles. If you can't cross or get past a point obstacle, it slows you down. It gets rid of momentum. And the commanders don't like that very much. All in all, it's about getting people where they need to go on the battlefield in order to defeat the enemy.
And if you're maybe describing a little bit how that actually looks like as painting a picture operationally is a company is rolling out, a mechanized company is rolling out, you guys are loading up into an armored vehicle, you have some sort of team. What does that look like?
From a mechanized perspective, yes, there would be an EOD team there with their specialty vehicle and equipment and kit and their team in close support to that maneuver element, whatever it is. If there was something found that's impeding mobility, the commander will make the call as to whether or not they mark bypass, depending on the mission parameters, and or send EOD down there to get rid of that and remove it. There would also be combat engineer support there too. So if the plan was to just, hey, mark this, let's bypass or BIP it, or blow it in place, BIP it.
Yeah, BIP it.
Get it out of the way, we need to move. That kind of falls to the engineers, probably with some oversight from the IED operator to where the best place or charge placement would be, and or the IED operator would take care of that, and then they would move forward. So one of the big things with it is that when the IED or UD operator is downrange doing something to a device, they're unable to protect themselves from any external threats. So, snipers, enemy attacks of any kind. So they really do rely on the infantry to protect them while they're down there trying to deal with that threat.
Let's talk about maybe some of the different types of devices. There's all sorts of flavors. You're talking about artillery pieces. We got mines, we got bombs. Break it down for us.
Well, there's several different categories of explosive threat on the battlefield. UXOs, so unexploded ordnance, is a big one. That encompasses landmines, artillery, mortars, grenades. This is stuff that's designed to explode on the battlefield, but fails to do so for whatever reason. Usually it's conventionally produced and whatnot. There's also booby traps. So manufactured booby traps, coming off an assembly line, pressure release, tension release, those kind of things. Right now in Ukraine, there's a big problem with the ML8, ML7 booby traps that are being produced by the Russian army that are littering the battlefield. A huge problem. Booby traps are set to harm, kill, or incapacitate soldiers by doing routine activities on the battlefield.
Right.
Bodies can be booby trapped, doors, windows, pathways, you name it. So you've got that threat as well. So you got UXOs, booby traps, then you've got your improvised explosive devices. Huge problem right now. A lot of the stuff that was happening in Afghanistan when the Russians were there, in the 80s, is migrated to the battlefield in Ukraine. So a lot of the IED tactics are being used by the soldiers on the Russian side to inflict damage on the Ukrainians. It's a huge problem. A quarter of the country is potentially untrafficable.
So when you're looking at these things, what do you look at? How do you break that down? It has different bits. What are the bits?
So there's really 5 components to an IED. So you would have a power source, a detonator, a main charge, a container that would enclose that main charge, and then you would also have the switch. Normally, I would say, 99% of IEDs have those 5 components. And I would say that really falls into 3 main categories: victim operated, time, and command. Victim operated really means that the person who's affected, hurt, killed, or injured by the explosive is actually the one that initiates it. So we're talking about things like tripwires, pressure plates, tension release switches, where the victim actually picks something up, opens a door, steps on something, and the IED goes off. So that's what we classify as a victim operated device. Time device obviously is very self-explanatory, but it could be things like mechanical timers. There's solar, there's hydro, there's all kinds of different things. But time-initiated devices just means that the IED is designed to go off at a specific time. The bomber is likely anticipating that the target is at that location when the bomb goes off. This is very common with things like venues, mass gatherings that are pre-planned or things like that. On that, it's quite easy to defeat a time threat on the battlefield by not setting patterns, not using the same routes, making it very hard for someone to set a timer and expect you to be there. The last one is the command initiated. This means that the bomber himself or herself is in control of the device. They control when that device goes off. So usually it's planted somewhere in a choke point or a canalizing terrain where they expect the target to enter and or get close to, and they can detonate it at a time of their choosing. So there's two subcategories to that. There's linked and separated systems. Linked systems would be something, picture a physical link from the actual device itself to the bomber. Something like a command wire, where if you could freeze time and you found the bomb, you could follow a physical trace all the way back to the bomber themselves.
Yeah.
And then there's the separated systems. Think of something like a cell phone or a key fob, where an electronic signal is sent, a receiver picks up that signal and initiates the device. So those are the three categories of IEDs that we use. But it's the threat assessment from the IED operator to identify who's being targeted, by what, by whom, for what reason. Everything comes into play to try to categorize that device.
Yeah, basic mission analysis, right? Like any other combat situation, you're looking at the 5 W's, try and break it down a little bit to be able to intervene at the appropriate space for that thing.
And, you also got to consider the fact that there could be more than one category involved here. Like when we talk about secondary and tertiary devices that are targeting the operator specifically, which happen quite often in Afghanistan.
Daisy chain.
Well, you could have a timed device that's programmed to go off when they expect the IED operator down there taking apart a VO IED that someone's found or identified or that they're looking to prosecute. So the questioning and the understanding of the battle space and the targeting criteria for the enemy and the patterns that have been set prior to arrival, like these are all things that the IED operator needs to understand. It's not a quick process to identify what the IED is, and it's definitely not a quick process to safely get rid of it when exploitation is the key objective, bringing the parts back for biometrics and screening. But in an MCO, like major combat operations, where we're all focused on here now, what we're seeing across the globe with Ukraine and Russia, exploitation will not be the hinge pin. It's about getting that threat out of the way safely.
Yeah, so you can move.
That's right. Yeah, to move. Yeah, that's right.
That's the thing is like you never really know what you're going to get, and it's all about the flavor of whoever decided to make that thing.
Absolutely. It's really only limited by the bomb maker's imagination.
That's right.
But improvised explosive devices have evolved so much over the last 20 years that it's almost hard to follow and keep pace with it. The delivery methods is something that's very important for us here at JSET to try to wrap our heads around because, you take an IED in a car.
Yeah.
Right. We call that a VBIED, a vehicle-borne improvised explosive device. And it was very common in the Afghanistan era.
Yeah, exactly.
Now take that bomb out of a car and place that bomb now on top of a drone.
Yeah.
Okay. It's still a delivery method. It's still a vehicle. It's still a vehicle-borne improvised explosive device. Now, the problem with that is that this particular VBIED, the drone, has absolutely none of the geographical restrictions that a vehicle or a ground-based transportation method would have.
Yeah.
It's got first-person view. It can attack the target directly from miles away, not putting the bomber at risk at all. Mm-hmm. And it's first-time hit every time.
Yeah.
There's no need now to draw the enemy into the kill zone. You can take the kill zone directly to them much easier with a drone.
Yeah.
And, you talk about the scale at which this is taking place. If we're talking about IEDs on drones, which I would argue 85 to 90% of what we're seeing in the FPV, like the first-person view drones in Ukraine, are improvised explosive devices strapped to drones.
Oh, wow. I did not know that.
Yeah, it's an incredible number. Just last year's stats, Russia was claiming that they could produce 8,000 FPV drones with the use of additive manufacturing, so 3D printers. Mm-hmm. Okay, now 8,000 a month. Now picture 8,000 IEDs flying around the skies in Ukraine a month, just from the Russian side. Okay, now take that number and probably double it or quadruple it for 2026. Like the capacity for them to produce this locally at the operational and tactical levels even on the battlefield is becoming insane.
It's definitely having an impact on the shape of maneuver warfare for sure. Right?
Absolutely. Defeating this type of delivery method is very complex and hard to do. The drones being used in the way they're being used in Ukraine, I was told this by a Ukrainian soldier not long ago, it's akin to the invention of gunpowder, how it's reshaping the battlefields of today. And I think it holds true. Like there's nothing really conventional about conventional warfare these days. Like it is changing so drastically and so quickly that it's really forcing us to look at how we're going to deal with this, how we're going to maneuver around the battlefield in this context. Because this problem is never going to go away. It's too effective.
And it goes without saying that with all of that comes probably a decent amount of training. What's the training like?
Well, there's a bit of a path with regards to this specialty. So once you've established yourself in the clearance diver community, the combat engineer corps, ammo technicians, and or the air weapon systems technicians, then you can be recruited into EOD. So conventional munitions disposal basic, CMD basic is really what the gateway is to becoming an EOD operator. So those core MOCs receive that as part of their trades training. So the CMD course is about a 2-month course that teaches everything about IDing ordnance, how to approach, how to dispose of some of those different threats. Doesn't touch on IEDs or anything like that. It's mostly just the UXO and conventional munition that they deal with on that. Then they move into the improvised explosive device assistant course where they learn how to use the tools, equipments, the robots that the EOD team will utilize in order to render safe an IED. After completion of the IED assistant course, normally what happens is that soldier will go back to their home unit and conduct OJT, which is on-the-job training, usually about a year. So that OJT package is critical for the next step into IED operator. That course, it's held out on the East Coast. They'll go out there, learn everything about how to operate inside of a bomb suit, use all the different tools, equipment, and ROVs that are part of the EOD teams and IED teams. And then once that's done, they'll come back and obviously operate either in a domestic role and or for expeditionary operations. However, the final piece to that is the conventional munitions disposal advanced course. Now that gets into the render safe procedures of all types of different munitions across the battlefield. So land, air, and sea munitions focused on, everything from landmines to torpedoes. How to identify that, how to approach, how to do the explosive ordnance reconnaissance, come back with that information and develop a render safe procedure for that. So that course specifically is about 8 months long. That's down in the US. Once a soldier has acquired all of those courses, so CMD basic, IED assist, IED operator, and CMD advanced, we consider them what we call a full spectrum operator, meaning that you can go into the improvised explosive device disposal operator, or you can move into the conventional munitions disposal, or you can do both.
So let's talk a little bit about exercises. We have exercises in Canada. We have exercises outside of Canada. What does the training environment bringing people together look like?
So all the sub-elements, so you're talking about the Navy, the Air Force, and the Army, all train specific to their elements. But there is platforms for a lot of cross-training. So like one of the big exercises that we host through JSET, the Joint Counter-Explosive Threat Cell here, our office is very focused on a particular exercise called Ardent Defender. We fund it every year. It's hosted usually in Gagetown, New Brunswick. It's an international exercise. So we bring in a lot of partners from NATO, usually upwards of between 8 and 12 different countries participate in this exercise. And it's very much focused on the tactical execution of improvised explosive device disposal. So it's really focused on the IED operators, identifying, neutralizing, disarming, and then exploiting the IED threats. So there's a level 2 lab that's out there that's able to provide that forensics type function, analyzing things for biometrics, different things. And that whole target the network piece is what they handle. So that's integrated into the exercise. What we're trying to do is really simulate an operational environment on that. And it's very successful. It's now become some of our NATO partners' go-to exercise every year.
How many people, by the way, go on Ardent Defender?
Roughly around 350 to 400 people. So yeah, it's a big exercise. It takes a lot of time, money, and effort to put that one together. So without our colleagues in 4ESR and 6CCSB, it would be very difficult for us to execute that properly. So kudos to them if they're listening.
Yeah, you got to give credit where credit is due.
That's right, yeah.
So where do you see things going forward from now? We talked a lot about the drone threat, a little bit of 3D printing. What does the future hold for us in this space?
Well, it is, like I said, it's evolving extremely quickly. You don't need to be an electronics guru or years of schooling to build some sort of sophisticated electronic device that could set off a bomb.
Right.
You need AI. So you can ask AI to do things for you that normally would have taken someone 6 years in university to learn how to do. So what that does is that opens the door up to nefarious actors to be more complex in this space. So we really need to keep up with that. The technology side of things, it's no longer just a pressure plate with a jug of HME somewhere. We're talking right. Switches that can sense the magnetic signature around them and program themselves to go off when that magnetic signature changes. For instance, in this room, there's a ton of metal. You put this thing down, it calibrates to this room, open the door, it senses that and goes off. And that technology is not necessarily new, but it's your average Joe or average Jane on the street can now produce this stuff easily. So really what we're trying to do, at JSET is identify how these threats are evolving. Obviously drones, this is something we're really paying attention to now. We're trying to get a fleet of drones, which is really actually going quite quickly, into the hands of the IED operators with AI tools involved in it to do reconnaissance on different things, to approach in different methods. Additive manufacturing, being able to produce improvised switches with calibrations to the millimeter in order to execute whatever function you needed to do to print that kind of thing en masse. And not just back in some factory somewhere, but literally in the trench line. Mobile print factories have been reported on the Russian side, ripping up and down the trench line, asking troops, what do you want me to print you? What do you need? And not just IED components, but components for their weapons, different things for their mods and their nods. And like the supply line piece to this is gone now with the addition to additive manufacturing and 3D printing. So this is a space where we're really getting involved and we're trying to learn more about it. We're trying to field it. For instance, on Ardent Defender, we deployed a mech shelter running off a generator and had upwards of 15 3D printers in that room, 3D printing training aids and targets for the exercise to just kind of showcase how easy it is to produce this stuff in austere conditions, right? So those are the kind of things that we're really focusing ourselves on. Almost nothing's safe to touch. Almost nowhere safe to go. So really what we need to do and what we are doing is trying to figure out what those threats are, how they affect our mobility on the battlefield, how we can close with and destroy the enemy. How do we get our infantry folks to close with and destroy the enemy if we can't get them there? So let's figure out what the threats are. Let's learn and try to develop new tactics, techniques, and procedures to defeat that.
All right. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to explain what EOD is all about.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's a great platform, and maybe we can work together again sometime.
Yeah, that would be great.
Cheers.
That was Master Warrant Officer Marty Gratrix, who's an EOD operator from the Canadian Armed Forces Joint Counter-Explosive Threat Team, or JSET. And I'm Captain Adam Orton with the Canadian Army Podcast. Orton out.